under the light of a small southern town in America, where racial discrimination and social prejudice seep into every corner. The story of a brave family has touched many hearts. Lucy, a young girl full of thoughtfulness, witnesses her father's courageous fight for justice as he decides to defend an innocent black man wrongfully accused of a crime. Alongside the challenges, sorrow, and opposition from the community, Lucy's family learns that the truth is not always recognized, and sometimes, doing what is right is the hardest thing in a world filled with bias. Yet, with each step they take, they come to realize that while justice may not always prevail, courage and compassion still shine through, like a light in the dark night of a society marked by injustice. One morning, as Scout prepared for school, she felt excited, but from the very first lesson, she sensed something different. The children in her class began to mock her because her father was defending a black man. "Your dad's defending that black criminal, right?" one of the kids said. Scout didn't fully understand the meaning of these words, but they made her feel confused and isolated. She couldn't understand why the other children were reacting like this toward her father, the man she had always trusted and admired. At home, Scout recounted to Atticus and Jem what had happened. She was bewildered and didn't understand why her classmates were acting so strangely. Jem, her older brother, tried to comfort her, but he couldn't clearly explain why people were reacting the way they were. Atticus looked at his children and said that there would come a time when they would face unavoidable challenges. And that courage wasn't about being fearless, but about doing the right thing even when others disagreed. From these conversations and the mockery at school, Scout began to realize that her father wasn't just an ordinary man in the town. Atticus had been asked to defend Tom Robinson, a black man falsely accused of raping Mayella Ewell, a white girl, in the 1930s Southern society, where racial segregation was deeply ingrained. This case was not just a legal matter but a battle over trust, justice, and racial discrimination. Scout began to face a change in how people saw her. The whispers and mockery from the community made her feel unsafe. She couldn't understand why an innocent man like her father was being criticized by everyone in town. She couldn't understand why the color of someone's skin could determine whether they lived or died. The trial of Tom Robinson was a fight not only for justice but for dignity, courage, and morality in a society filled with racial prejudice. Atticus Finch accepted to defend Tom Robinson, a black man accused of raping Mayella Ewell, the daughter of Bob Ewell, a poor and uncouth man in town. Despite facing hatred and opposition from most of the town's residents, Atticus stood firm. He believed that everyone deserved a fair chance in the legal system, no matter their skin color. From the moment Atticus took the case, he was aware of the challenges he would face. Macomb, the town where he lived, was a place where racial segregation was unavoidable. Black people were always considered inferior, and a white person like Mayella, even if she were the victim, would still be protected and favored by the legal system. Despite this, Atticus decided to stand up, not just for his career, but for the future of his children. He wanted to teach Scout and Jem an important lesson about justice and dignity. Atticus understood that defending Tom would not only make him the target of hatred in the community but could also endanger his family's safety. But he couldn't give up. Even before the trial began, Atticus had mentally prepared himself for the challenges that he and his family would face. He wanted his children to know that justice wouldn't always win, but no matter the outcome, they had to be strong and do what was right. When the trial officially began, the atmosphere in the town became tense and heavy. Macomb, though a small and peaceful place, had now turned into a battlefield between human values and racial discrimination. Everyone in town was focused on the court to witness the trial. Scout and Jem were told by Atticus not to go to the trial, but out of curiosity, they sneaked in, hiding among the crowd. At first, Atticus and his legal team faced many difficulties. The witnesses for the prosecution, Bob Ewell and Mayella, failed to provide convincing evidence. Bob Ewell was a drunk, rude man with a shady past, while Mayella, though the victim in the story, carried bitterness and dark secrets from her family. Despite this, both received support from the white community in town. Atticus began his defense with a patient and measured strategy. He didn't immediately attack Bob Ewell or Mayella. Instead, he gently but sharply asked questions. Atticus started with Mayella, trying to point out the flaws in her testimony while subtly implying that it wasn't Tom Robinson but Bob Ewell who might have raped Mayella. Atticus, can you tell me why you said Tom Robinson raped you? We don't see any evidence to support that. Mayella responded weakly, unable to provide a reasonable explanation for her statement. Atticus continued questioning her about the events of that day. And gradually, the contradictions in her story began to surface. Although Mayella tried to remain firm in her testimony, the cracks in her story could no longer be hidden. Next, Atticus turned to Bob Ewell, Mayella's father. Atticus demonstrated that Bob Ewell could be the one who had beaten Mayella, and the injuries that Mayella had sustained were likely from his hands, not Tom Robinson's. However, the key point Atticus wanted to highlight was how society and racial discrimination could distort justice. Atticus not only questioned the events themselves but also the society in which Tom Robinson lived. He asked whether it was really fair for a black man to have no opportunity to clear his name simply because of his race. Despite the clear truth, the trial was still shaped by deep-seated societal prejudices. For this reason, Atticus knew that the verdict wouldn't change the injustice already ingrained in society. But throughout the trial, Atticus never lost his respect for anyone. He treated Mayella and Bob Ewell with respect, not only because they might have made mistakes, but because he knew that, in the end, we are all human, and only fairness could bring us closer to the truth. Finally, the trial ended, and the jury found Tom Robinson guilty, despite clear evidence proving Tom's innocence. In a society where racial discrimination was deeply embedded in the hearts of people, the jury's decision was not surprising. Tom Robinson was convicted, and Atticus failed in his attempt to defend him. However, Atticus was not disappointed. He had done what was right. And although Tom was convicted, Atticus knew he had tried his best to uphold justice. At the end of the trial, Atticus not only taught Scout and Jem a lesson about justice but also about dignity and courage. He wasn't just a lawyer, but a father teaching his children to stand up for what is right, even when the world around them is against them. Although Atticus had delivered an excellent defense and provided irrefutable evidence to prove Tom's innocence, the all-white jury still decided to convict him. This decision not only disappointed Atticus but also caused deep pain for the entire Finch family. Tom Robinson was convicted and taken to prison, although there was hope that he would be pardoned. One day, during an attempt to escape, Tom was shot and killed by the guards. For Scout and Jem, Tom Robinson's death was a huge shock. It not only made them feel the deepest sense of injustice but also made them mourn the loss of a world of justice they once believed in. The lives of Scout and Jem Finch are intertwined with the story of Boo Radley, the man who lives in seclusion in the old house. Mysterious and closed off. When they were younger, Scout and Jem had heard countless strange stories about Boo from the town's children and from adults in the community. All they knew about Boo were rumors and whispers from afar. They were taught that Boo was a terrifying creature, a strange person no one wanted to approach. With each story and each rumor, the image of Boo in their minds grew darker and more bizarre. At first, Scout and Jem truly believed that Boo Radley was a monster living in the darkness of the old house. They imagined Boo as a gigantic creature who could leap out of the shadows and harm anyone who dared approach his home. Boo's story became a ghost tale shared by everyone in the town, terrifying the two siblings even though they had never actually met him. But over time, and through their silent observations, Scout and Jem began to realize one thing: what they heard was not always the truth. Contrary to what they imagined about Boo, they began to see that Boo was simply a very different person. Not evil, but someone abandoned by society and living in solitude. The gifts Boo left them in the oak tree, candies, pieces of paper with notes, seemed to be his quiet, secret way of trying to connect with them. What Scout and Jem once thought were ghostly stories began to change completely on a fateful night when the truth about Boo Radley was revealed in a deeply moving and human way. After the trial, when the Finch family's life was severely affected by the hostility of the townspeople, a terrible event occurred. Bob Ewell, Mayella's father, in a fit of rage and desire for revenge, decided to attack Scout and Jem as they were on their way home. He followed them, intending to kill the two children to avenge his loss in court. At that moment, when everything seemed to be coming to a dark end, Boo Radley appeared. In a brave act, He saved Jem and Scout, pulling them from the clutches of Bob Ewell. Scout could hardly believe her eyes. The person she and her brother had once seen as a monster was actually the only one protecting them from danger. Boo, in silence, saved the two children, brought Jem home, and protected them from Bob Ewell, who was viciously chasing after them for revenge. Boo's act not only saved their lives, but also proved that he was not the enemy that everyone in the town had thought him to be. Boo Radley had truly become a hero in this story, and his rescue came not only from courage but also from love and the kindness he had hidden for all these years. After being saved, Scout had the chance to meet Boo Radley for the first time. In that moment, Scout stood by the window, looking at Boo's gentle face. She looked at him with eyes no longer filled with fear but with empathy. A completely different perception than what she had once had of him. He's not a monster, Scout told herself. He's the one who saved us. What she had imagined about Boo was completely different from reality. Boo was not an evil person, he was a man living in isolation, abandoned by society. When the trial ended, even though the result was not what they had hoped for, Scout and Jem gradually realized that, despite the overwhelming injustice in society, they still could not abandon the values their father had taught them. Atticus had taught them that, in life, sometimes justice does not prevail immediately. But the important thing is that we must stand firm and fight for what is right, no matter how painful the outcome may be. Atticus, despite having endured countless challenges, maintained his dignity and belief in his values. He never abandoned his principles of justice and compassion. In the most difficult moments, he remained a model of a resilient man, not backing down from difficulties or social prejudices. Even if he felt tired and sorrowful, he never gave up on defending the truth. Finally, through all the upheavals in the story, Scout and Jem grew up. They understood that, even though society can be wrong, and justice might not always win, they still had to continue fighting for what is right. They learned how to face injustice, societal prejudice, and more importantly, how to cherish the values their father had taught them. These values were kindness, resilience, and belief in justice, even though at times it may not triumph immediately.